hear us?
All right, well, welcome everybody to our first public briefing on the annual plan for this year. I think it's a really opportune time to sort of lay out some of the challenges we have as a council going forward. And I'm really heartened, I guess, by the fact that we've been able to have a couple of meetings to get our heads around it as an elected council, understand the challenges, and then I think what I'm hoping today is talk more broadly with the public who are tuning in to set the scene for what we need to do. I guess the only two things that is probably worth stressing is firstly that we're not making decisions today, and this is a public briefing so that people can understand the issues. We can give some guidance, but actually, we won't be making a decision to go out to the community until February 15th, I think it is, of next year. So we've got plenty of time. And I guess the only other point before I hand over to Dawn to set a bit of a more detailed scene is just really how we'll run this today. I think in the interest of the public being able to fully digest the information that's there, I'd be quite keen to run through it all first, and then actually we can move and have a discussion and look for that guidance at the end of that. So is everyone generally comfortable with that approach? Perfect. All right, well, Dawn, do you want to set the scene? And then, and I should say we've got a hard close at 3:30 on this as well. So depending on your questions and discussion will determine how many people get to have a say. So do you want to set the scene, Dawn?
Thank you, Sam. And just for our new elected members, this is the third time Council has done briefings in public, 2 in the last term, and we trialled it and found it both valuable for elected members themselves, but also for the public to get clear transparency about the issues that we're dealing with. So this is the first one, obviously, for this new council term, and something I hope you will both enjoy, but also recognise that we are giving really detailed information to our residents. The purpose of today is to take you through the journey from the starting point where we believed we were at before we do anything at all, and where we have currently got to, and that will look at both capital expenditure and operational expenditure. We have a series of questions that we will come to near the end, where we will want to test with elected members the guidance that you wish to give us, so that we can work, as you will undoubtedly appreciate, all the way through Christmas into the new year to get ready to shape the final pieces for the annual plan, where we will come to council in the middle of February. We're still just working through exactly the date. We just want to get it right. So I'm going to hand over to the team, and just to say thank you to the services, to Peter's area of a business on performance, to finance, and to the PMO. It's been a collective team effort to get us what have been incredibly challenging times to the point we've got to so far. So, gentlemen, the floor's yours.
Thanks, Dawn. Good afternoon, everybody. For those listening in, my name's Peter Ryan. I head up the corporate planning team. You'll be hearing today from Russell Holden from the finance team and Andrew Robinson, Paul Dadson from the project management office. Our job today is to frame the issues that have taken place since the long-term plan last year, and there are a lot. The world has moved very quickly, and to seek your guidance on whether we're getting the solutions right, so we can move forward with the annual plan for next year. Just in passing, there is a briefing for community board chairs and deputy chairs on Thursday evening with the chief executive. Work will progress over the break, and then we'll come back to you towards the end of January to check in to make sure we're still on the right track, and then adoption mid-February to be confirmed. Okay, very quickly, and I apologise to those of you who've heard this before. It is to some extent intended for new councillors and the community. Long-term plans are, of course, every 3 years, and the purpose of an annual plan is to keep that information current and alive. This year is a classic example of why we need those, because if you hark back to the middle of last year, with inflation at record lows, interest rates looking pretty sweet, the world has moved really fast since then. And that's why the annual plan needs to keep things up to date. Couple of, housekeeping rules. Amending really big, significant things, that could be levels of service, projects or budgets, may trigger specific consultative procedures with the community, or they may not. It's case by case. It depends on the effects of the change. But bear in mind that we may trigger a special consultative procedure when we change large things that are significant to the community. The aim here is also to minimise overlap between the annual plan and development of the long-term plan next year. We're trying to keep the annual plan contained in the timeframes that we've just framed for you. And then when the annual plan draft is done, then move on to building the LTP. We're trying not to conflate those two and stress your time or staff's time. As I said, the adoption of the draft will be broadly speaking, the middle of February next year for the annual plan, with the final to be adopted in June, and of course LTP development to start in March onwards. In terms of assumptions we're making, the advice we have at the moment, and everyone has some opinions here, but technically speaking, the formal advice we have is that Three Waters will not be included in the next long-term plan, and we're assuming that until that plan takes effect, we will continue with Three Waters networks in a fit-for-purpose state, as set out in the last long-term plan. That does have some bearing on this annual plan, which is why I took you through that. What has changed in the financial section, I'll now hand over to Russell and then come back to you at the end with the questions about what we're doing to go forward.
Thanks very much, Peter. And as Peter outlined, the world has changed quite significantly from where we were a year ago, or even less. As this slide sets out, the global influences impact our nation quite considerably. Interest rates and inflation have gone to levels nowhere near expected by any economists anywhere around the world, let alone in New Zealand. So that's putting pressures and struggles on our organisation and other organisations so far as supply chains and the cost of products, recruiting and retaining staff have also had an impact on where we need to go. So looking at inflation, the local government cost index, you can see here, one more slide, there. That shows the jump, if you like. The orangey line is the 2021 forecast where that was, and the jump has been quite significant upwards. So there's two aspects to the inflation. One is the jump last year, the current year, that we didn't foresee when we set the annual plan. So the inflation was higher, and also is the impact of the year that we're projecting, the 23-24. So there's a gap, if you like, of almost 8.6% in that space. Interest rates. So it's just good to remember. That's a really good slide. It shows the impact. So last year, markets were expecting the OCR, the official cash rate, to reach a peak of 2.0%. So not so long ago, the Reserve Bank came out and announced that there'd been a jump of 0.75, so up to 4.25%, with an expectant jump of 5.5%. So that was just really recently. So that's where that was. So whereas that previously had been, expected to be about 4.1, so significantly high jump. And that slide there, you can sort of see the jumps going up and the rate of increase that's going up as well. So that's what we're facing. And these slides set this out as well, so showing what the cost of an interest is, where we expected it to be, and the jump that it is. Now, it's important to point out here that a lot of council's debt is hedged, so that means it's fixed. Probably about 80% of our debt is fixed, with about 20% of what we deem floating. So we pick that up as we need it. The three waters impact will change the level of borrowing going out as well. So that's another impact. So the guiding assumptions for the annual plan. In light of all that, we've focused on deliverability of the capital program, and Andrew will come and speak to that more in a minute. Maintaining levels of service, limit any new proposals other than compliance matters or matters outside control, and revisit our financial assumptions. What levers and things can we pull to better impact that? So just as a rule of thumb, it's good to note that so far as the operational impact on rates is 6.3% expenditure is about 1% on increase in rates. Capital, it's about $80 million borrowed, is 1% on rates. Now, we budget so that probably a quarter of that is spent in the first year, impacts in the first year by taking up the borrowing, so 25%, and then the full amount is budgeted from year 2 onwards. Not all capital is borrowed for, it's about 60% that is. So this is where we, started. So last year, for this current year that we're in, the projection was that next year the rate would be about just over 5%. We've taken those external factors that I just spoke about, inflation on the operating accounts, inflation on renewals. So renewals is for those assets that there's not new capital works, but we're upgrading our renewal. So we rate for most of that, about 60%. The impact of interest, insurance premiums are going to be going up by 0.5%, and there's other legislative requirements that have been forced upon us, another 0.5%. Staff service level proposals accounted for about 1.7%. So that left us, the first landing on the position was 14.6% rates increase. So that's just, it's important to note, that was just our first landing. And so then we looked at what other levers can we now look to mitigate that impact? And starting off, Andrew will now take us through the capital program to being one of those levers.
Kia ora koutou, ko Andrew Robinson, toko ingoa. I'm the head of the Program Management Office, or PMO. So the purpose of my slides is to take you through the capital program. We're going to look at the proposed draft capital program for FY24, and I particularly want to talk about the proposed changes that provide us with a deliverable and affordable program. The setting in the LTP framework after the adoption of the last annual plan had $597 million in financial year 24, and through the work that we've done to this point and in some briefings with you, we've been able to reduce that by 164 million. The reduction is in that year, and the spread is retained in the LTP period through rephasing. So it's not a cut in the LTP, it's a rephasing, but does provide a reduction in the subject year FY24. So we arrive at a figure of 433, which we'll discuss a little further. We also went a little bit further and challenged ourselves to look at the consequences of further cuts to 390 million and have a look at just what that looks like, that lower threshold. So the current position in the LTP framework is shown in this graph, and you can see there's quite a divergence between what we forecast in FY24, looking at historical trends and where our sort of deliverability thresholds are, sort of circa 400 million if you look at the green line of the last few years. So projecting forward to 23-24, FY24, we're saying about 433, and that measure in the current plans up in the high 590s. So there's quite a gap there which we needed to address. The way in which we did that, and this is in reference to, I just want to a question we had the other day about the prioritisation criteria from Councillor Goff. So as we went through the rephasing for FY24 through that 21 to 31 period, we took into account a number of factors. We took into account the in-flight projects that were already committed. They're very hard to stop. It's not impossible to stop an in-flight project, but it can be quite costly. We looked at critical levels of service. We looked at where projects had synergies with other projects. For example, a water main might be followed by a street renewal, so that you're not digging up the road after you've laid not digging up the road to lay a main in the future, and particularly regulatory requirements as well. So there's some certain givens that that determine what's taken into the prioritisation of that work that makes up the 433. And as I said, we're looking for a net zero and have achieved a net zero change across those LTP years. The greater challenge comes in the LTP process, which Peter's referred to, and in that process we'll get into a lot more detail and more quantification around the prioritisation. And in doing that, we'll take into account things that the Council's working on presently, the development of the strategic framework, for example, the infrastructure strategies and the financial strategies. And those are really important guiding documents that will help guide and inform decision-making and prioritisation in that subsequent period. So after that screening, to look at what we can reasonably retain in FY24 while trying to seek that reduction of about 164 million. This is what we've done. We've closed the gap, the blue line being the core infrastructure line, and the green line being the forecast. So that's what we're trying to get these two things matched up. The next slide really shows in a bit of a nutshell across that those years remaining in the LTP where we've come from. So on the left-hand side, the set of Manhattans are the current capital program. And you can see in FY24, the most immediate left bar is FY24. We push it over to the right-hand set of Manhattan graphs to get that reduction of 164 million. We'll be looking to with our best endeavours, aim to achieve close to or near that 100% delivery target, and we're determining that based on our past performance. I just want to really draw attention to the fact that when we talk about core infrastructure, that excludes some of the bigger ticket items like Te Kaha and Parakuori. In fact, it excludes just those two. But it also includes all funding sources. So it's the gross expenditure. We look at it from a delivery perspective. So it's including all funding sources, for example, from shovel-ready or waka kotahi subsidies, etc. So while we've addressed through these proposals a reduction in FY24, you can see as you look across the two Manhattans, there is a bulge occurring out in the future years of the proposed, and that's the challenge that that awaits us for the LTP period that we'll have to address once we get those guiding strategic documents in place. This one is the same Manhattan of the proposed, but it's just looking back in time to show the little dots are showing the history of performance against the core infrastructure program. And you're seeing there that it draws a bit of a line around about 400 million, and we've taken that into account. And the two line diagrams are showing how we've cranked it down to 433, but you can see that it pushes it out in future years, which is still the remaining challenge. The other thing this informs you is when you look at the colour of the bar charts, the Manhattans, they're aligned to each of the main service areas: Three Waters, Parks, Citizens and Community, Internal Activities and Transport. So if you look more closely, you can see the numbers the dollars that are assigned to each of those service areas. I wanted to include this next graph as well. It's a lava diagram showing what we call the primary drivers that we assign to each project. So each project gets a primary driver. It's not to say that it might not achieve another objective, but these really tell you that the primary focus, or a key focus, has to be on renewal of assets. Maybe we're doing some catch up to achieve some backlog demand. Possibly we're providing a project primarily for infrastructure growth, or for an improved level of service, or for a new service. And sometimes you get a little bit of combination of both. For example, you could be replacing a water main, and it might be adding some increased level of service or certainty around delivery of that water supply. So it's a way of categorising our projects, and we use that to help us prioritise, and we've got some information that shows you how that's cut. This is a bit of a sort of like an asset management 101 type graph. I think what this is really trying to say to you is when we look at investment of infrastructure, we have to do some planned and predictive maintenance. And the analogy I've used is if, for example, you've got a nice villa, weatherboard house, you could paint it every 2 years and keep it in tip-top shape, but you'd have to pay someone to paint it every 2 years. And if you did that for 20 years, you'd probably spend quite a lot of money, even though the paint job might be quite quick and easy. If you only did it every 20 years, you might be replacing a few rotten cells and weatherboards, and your cost of job would be quite a lot higher than painting it every second year. It's just about finding that sweet spot of not overdoing it, but doing it sufficiently to keep it in good condition. And back to the house analogy, 10 years or so you paint your house. You just got to find that sweet spot. It's the same with asset renewals of all the asset classes that we have. So getting into a bit of the crunch area, this is what the reduction to 433 looks like, spread across each of the service areas and allocated against each of those primary drivers. So you're looking at the service areas on the horizontal line, and the reductions across the primary drivers on the vertical lines for a circa $164 million reduction in that grand total, which has been rephased into the other years. So that occurred across about 24% of the projects that were lined up in FY24. So just starting to summarise this somewhat, we've focused primarily on our two key themes are deliverability and affordability. So we want to set a what I call a demandingly achievable target, and in doing that, we have to manage the inflationary pressures that go with that. We've done that. We've managed the inflationary pressures at a project or a program level. There was some consideration given to having a separate contingency budget at a PMO level, but we think it's better to hold it closer to the project, and we'll use the any pressures that we have around contingency management through our established change management processes and within the delegations that exist, that at times come back to the council to report in on how those are being managed within those thresholds. We've got to also be really careful too about any carry forward that we might inherit, if you like, from our current year, to avoid any significant kind of reloading on top of things that we think we're already committing in 24. We don't want to add to the burden to make it undeliverable or even unaffordable. And so we'll seek to achieve that net zero carry forward position into next year. As I said, further assessment, in-depth assessment will be required as part of the LTP process. We can't solve everything now in this annual plan 24 process. Certainly additional funding from external sources can be attractive, and we've talked about some of that just recently in the transport area. We've just got to be mindful and cautious about accommodating that within our deliverability sort of thresholds and capacity, and not overload ourselves. Equally, not turn down external funding sources without good consideration. So the focus that we made in the reductions and the rephase of that 164 was primarily through transport and Three Waters. We got to about 80 million in transport and 60 million in Three Waters. So that's how we got to 433. The next slide just starts to introduce the idea of how could we, what would getting to 390 million look like? And what we did was we looked at the projects that were in our project management system in FY24. We looked at those that were in the concept and plan phase. So these bars show the budget spread of projects through the project life cycle, from concept all the way through to design, procure, construct, and handover. So we looked at the ones to the left of the red line there, which are in concept and plan, considering that those would be have less consequence if they were able to be reasonably suspended or deferred. What we found is that they were holding budgets that were really significantly aligned to programs. Some of them had $0 spent against them, so we're watching them closely to see that they're still beneficial to a future year's program, and some were critical to levels of service. So in effect, we found it really hard for that to yield anything, and overall we felt that with the 390 level we couldn't really achieve anything more readily out of that, and further to that, I think we need to really be careful about the consideration of consequences of further reductions. If you think back to that lava diagram I showed you around the levels of service and the primary drivers, it could start to significantly compromise some of our levels of service. In addition, I suppose another consideration is if you think about the value of money today, if we went down as low as 390, or any dollar figure today is going to be of less value to us in a year's time with the inflationary pressures that Russell's just been talking about. So we've got to be mindful of that as well. And from a rates impact, the 433 down to 390 provided a fairly negligible additional rates reduction in the order of 0.1%, just really well probably exposing us to quite a bit of risk around asset failure or non-compliance, and the potential for, you know, the rotted weatherboard in your house, some more expensive reactive maintenance. So in summary, at a rephasing of 164, resulting in that reduction in FY24, we think we've got a deliverable program. Nothing is cut, it's moved, it's been rephased. The opportunity for further reconsideration lies in the LTP process. And I think just importantly, we want to recognise the agility and agility provisions that a program managed by the PMO offers us in terms of being able to move projects around. And I just want to emphasise that the projects that we've looked at now and the supporting data that we've given you, that it is a moment in time and things do change, and you'll see change request things come through to you from time to time. So projects can move, the change process manages that, and we will. The other thing I just want to say in terms of projects span financial years, so they don't always fit neatly in a nice financial year box. So we've got to have a degree of agility. We've got to have a best laid plan, and that's what this is. But things will change and do change along the way, recognising the higher level figures that we're looking to achieve here. Second summary slide, I'm almost there, just with 2 to go. I've talked about the 390 providing us with quite a bit of risk in terms of asset failure, non-compliance and more expensive repairs. Find it hard to support as a result with little financial rates impact to gain from that. And the 433 we feel is the right sort of balance between good financial management and good stewardship of the council's assets. So we're seeking that guidance today on that. So just to pick up off the 14.6 start position from the do nothing position, this is the impacts that CapEx make to the number. With the forecast lower borrowing in our current year FY23, it'll provide a 0.7% reduction, and then the reductions that we're proposing through the 433 million offer a further 0.5% reduction to land us on 13.4% if we go from the do nothing to what I've proposed to you today. The last one before I hand over to the OPEX team is just to draw attention to the schedules that accompanied this presentation. There is a lot of information in those schedules. They've been produced with quite a bit of haste and a lot of work and effort, but they're there to provide you with some good information in various perspectives, by service area, by phase, by ward. And then we've looked at some information from financial year 23, the current year. We've provided you with some change rationale, and additionally we've provided you with some more detailed information based on the feedback that some councillors have already given us. What I would want to say though is these are working documents. They are subject to change, as I've sort of alluded to, and there may even be some minor discrepancies in there. One thing that springs to mind, for example, is some of the ward boundaries, and you see that in attachment I think it's 4 and 4A. Because of some of the boundary changes that we've had recently, we haven't been able to chase that through just yet. But the intentions are net zero and information by service areas. But we just want to put a little bit of a disclaimer in there that there could be 1 or 2 things that will evolve over time, and they will be corrected in terms of the final consultation document. But very much sort of working papers to give you good visibility and transparency of the process we're going through. So that's Sam, all I've got on CapEx.
Thank you. That's a very useful presentation. What we might do is, we'll do questions at the end, so we'll go OPEX now.
Sure.
And then I'd quite like Lynn and Katie maybe to just talk a wee bit about engagement after that, if that's okay.
Yep, perfect. Yep, done.
So yeah, can you take us through OPEX, Russell? Thanks.
Certainly can. So moving on, as Andrew's outlined, we started with the 14.6. Making the adjustments for capital both the current year and next year brings us down to 13.4. Then the other levers that we've looked at to date and the impact that's having. So the things that we've looked at so far, removing some of those service level proposals or funding them differently has resulted in a 1.4% reduction. Updating staff capitalisation, so that's staff that are working on capital projects as opposed to working on normal operating, because they're working capital, we can capitalise those staff, so therefore the impact is less on rates. So there's a 0.5% saving there. Subvention receipts, so that's going to be slightly less than we thought we were going to be receiving. So like I say, there's still work in this place, but that's a 0.1% increase. Rating based growth, and I'll come to that, but that's effectively the increased number, if you like, over the number of rateable properties throughout the city. So that creates a 0.6% decrease. And rating for debt repayment and asset renewals, again, I'll come to this in more detail, but that's brought the number down by 2.1%. So overall, it's the position that we're sitting at today is an 8.9%. So looking at the rating database, just to give clarity, so when we struck the rates for the 21-22 year, the strike was higher than forecast. So what that means is the number of properties or the level of rateable properties is as at the end of June. So when we strike the rates right on the 1st of July, it's what that number is. So we try to anticipate what that'll be, working with QV, credible values, and the information that we have on hand to get as close as possible. So we were slightly under, so that means there's more properties that are being rated than we thought. So looking at QV again for the current year, the year that we are in now. So what would be the level of properties, rateable properties that will be that Christchurch City Council will have, and so we're expecting that to jump by about 0.4%. So adding those two things together is how we get the 0.6% in the previous slide. So what that means is there's more people paying the rates, so it's the people who are currently paying will be paying less. Okay. We looked at how we rate for debt repayment. So our current debt repayment strategy is to repay debt over 30 years. So we look at and 30 years is about the average life of our depreciable assets. So we looked at closely at that to see if we could move that out further. Three Waters, I think we looked at that, and there was an average life of the assets there was around about 40 years. And so therefore the other assets are less than that to bring the overall average down to 30. So we thought this wasn't the time. Certainly post next year and as part of the LTP with the Three Waters reform, that'll be a whole new look in that space, but not at this time. Occasionally we look at rating for additional debt repayment to smooth rates increases for future years. So again, we've removed that for the current one. Rating for asset renewals is another area that we looked at. So our strategy is to fully fund rating for renewals by 2031. So we increase on average about 2% each year to get to that position. So where we currently are, we looked at could we smooth that out but still maintain our target of 2031, and we were able to do that because it can be a bit lumpy. So we were able to do that. So like the slide says, currently we rate for about $165 million in that space, and it's looking to increase. There's things that principles that we follow, not just follow, that guiding principles that help us when looking at those things, how far we can move. So we don't borrow for operational expenditure, okay? We only borrow for capitals and, like I say, partly for renewals. We don't want to impact our debt headroom. So the debt headroom means that level of debt that we currently have against the total amount of debt that council could have. Should something unforeseen happen, then we can go higher. We've got to maintain that. We don't want to breach our treasury ratios or covenants, make sure that our interest to ratepayer receipts is within line, and make sure that, like I say, we're not at odds with our strategies and policies, because we don't want to, impact the generations that follow us. So this was the rates forecast in the last annual, as the annual plan, as we sort of outlined. Like I said at the start, it was looking at 5.05%, which was slightly lower than where the LTP had forecast. You note there that the important factor is that the annual plan includes decisions that were made after the adoption, like Te Kaha and Papakuri coming through. Okay, so that's why it's a bit higher. This slide sets out that smoothing, if you like. Now that smoothing where we talked about reducing the level of renewals, rate-funded renewals expenditure in the next year, proposed reduction for the 23-24 year to bring that down, but it does push it out further, but it does reduce that spike. Also highlight that the future years there is still quite an increase in rates. Again, three waters will impact what that looks like, so there's a significant amount of work to do post that. We've looked at the inflation factors that we put in place. If inflation is again expected to be higher than we thought it was, both for next year and for the following years as well. So it's not just a current year proposal. So there's risks in undercooking that. So we've looked closely at what we can do. So we've looked, for inflation, we would look at the major spends. So we've gone through each of the large contracts that we have in place for the infrastructure works, transport, three waters, and what inflation factors are in those contracts. We've looked at staff commitments, and that probably, taking those out, there's probably about $100 million worth of expenditure that would fit in the, I guess, the that haven't got an inflation factor locked in, but what level of risk can we take in that place? Can we apply the full level of inflation, or can we adopt a lower level of inflation and ask the business to absorb some of that? So those are the types of levers that we are exploring. Okay. Included in the things we're looking at, this slide sets that out. So, like I said, the staff service levels proposals and options, there's still consideration of some items in that space. We're looking at the vacant position strategy and the vacancy provision. So there's two parts of this. One part is, have we got vacancies that are unfilled? And what is what's the criteria and demand in filling those positions? And the other part of that equation is what's the lag between someone leaving and a new person starting. In different parts of the business, that's different. We've got frontline facing staff and some processing staff. You need to have someone in place. So you either got lucky enough to recruit someone to start as the other person leaves. That's most unusual. Or we have to bring in temp labour to make sure that service continues. But that's not always the case. Often there's a gap, and so what is that gap and how can we measure it? So that we're looking at that as well. Fees and charges. So what's the capacity within the different parts of the business to increase the fees and charges that we currently charge to the residents without compromising overall revenue? It's no use putting the fee up to a level that just drives away funds coming through. So we're trying to marry that up. I've outlined a bit about the risks and options for inflation, and like I say, how much of the business can absorb. So we're still working through that. Tax subvention options, again, we're looking at that as what opportunities or are available to council. And of course, anything further that council yourselves can provide would be much appreciated. So in summary, there's a high level of high numbers that are impacting council that are outside council's control. So the focus for the budget is on deliverability and affordability, and we need to look at the city as a whole. We're looking to maintain the levels of service as far as possible, and we need to, like I said, maintain that affordability with the responsible steward of assets. So we just can't stop renewing, we can't stop doing maintenance. There's things that we need to carry on and commit to doing. Just a note there on the revaluation. So that information will be coming out to all ratepayers on the 25th of January. We've had talks with QV on that. So yeah, that's when that'll be out and public. Now, there's no overall rate impact for the council on the revaluation. It just impacts the amount or change on an individual basis. You know, it affects the incidence of rates. And like the last point says there, where we've made substantial work so far, we believe, in bringing the initial 14.6, which was where we started, down to 8.9, but there's still other levers, and that's what we're looking at. So in summary, this is where we are, and those are the steps or to where we are now at the 8.4. Just a wee touch on there about the revaluation, which is every 3 years, so there'll be no impact on rates for the council, but just individuals, and that'll come into effect from for the 23-24 annual plan. Cool. I think Peter's going to be coming down the steps any moment.
We've still got some questions here for some options here for you around capital, but I wonder if this isn't an opportune moment to take a break.
Yeah, what we might do first, if we get Katie and Lynn to just talk through perhaps the public-facing side of the engagement, if that's okay, and then we might take a.
So given the circumstances we've outlined for you this afternoon, there is no doubt that we need to be very conscious of the impact of the proposed rates increase on our communities. We're expecting that there will be a relatively high level of interest, and subject to councillor feedback and guidance, it is likely that there may well be some changes which will stimulate some public interest. So in that context, we've already given some thought as to how we can engage with our communities. This is not definitive because it will depend on the specifics, but at the same time, what we are planning to do is to obviously consult on the annual plan from roughly early March. It'll be 4 weeks, and we are looking to utilise all available channels to engage with our different communities. So that includes electronic, hard copy, and face-to-face. We are planning to engage with people where they are, rather than necessarily expect them to come here. So it really is about partnering with our stakeholders in the community and being out to enable people who perhaps wouldn't normally engage with council to have their say. We are also looking to make the most of technology, and since the last annual plan, we've actually introduced some new tools which have really been very well received to enable people to engage in non-traditional ways, and that might be webinars. It could be, we've got a new ideas board, and there will be bubble diagrams and improved levels of detail so that people can actually dive into and look at the actual impact of what the proposed decisions are, so that they're able to make an informed submission if they wish to attend hearings or to provide some feedback. We think that combination will give a very fair and timely opportunity for members of the community to impact, and we look forward to working with councillors to make sure that that is clear and that it's very accessible to our community.
Great, thank you very much. Katie, there's nothing you wanted to add? No, perfect. I'm sure we'll see a lot more of you as we work through this. Peter mentioned potentially having a break. Does anyone want a break, or are we happy to keep going through? Sounds like we're happy to keep going through. Excellent. So, Pete, I'm quite keen for you to kind of bring us to what we might do first is flag the topics up for discussion. There's a couple more further down as well, just around the levels of service and things like that. But what I wonder is, do we want to just have a few questions now, and then we'll go back to this? So we'll start with Yanni and then go to Aaron.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it was just kind of a high-level question around the specific projects being deferred. Is that now all public?
I believe the schedules are.
Yeah, so there's attachments. There should be attachments in the back of the PowerPoint.
So I just want to check that, but they're all public now from today.
Yeah, where is Lynn?
Cool.
They'll be... Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Please remembering these are just proposals and thoughts, they're not decisions.
Yeah. So do you want specific questions on what's on those lists now, or how are we dealing with?
Yeah, what I'd quite like to do first is if people have got relatively high level questions just around the nature of the annual plan, and then if we need to drill in, we can do. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to come back to you if you've got specific ones.
I mean, I guess just the highest level question, the two high level questions from me is, how much input have community boards had into what's being proposed, and then, in terms of, given the significance of the changes that are proposed, I'm still sort of puzzled why your first thing aimed to do a minimal, annual plan, but actually it's pretty significant what's been proposed, even one or two projects of quite significant amounts of money. So I just wondered if you could give us any more detail or clarification over why we wouldn't need to do an SCP.
Okay, so the first question's around community boards. Mary, is that a potentially a question for you just around the community boards and how they're going to be engaged through this? Or Lynn? Yeah.
How are they engaged, or how is their feedback incorporated into what's been proposed in front of us?
So maybe if I go back to what we said at the very beginning, maybe you might not need to answer this. This is the first public briefing after some initial discussions with councillors, and that will be worked through with them. So Dawn and I are meeting with community board chairs and deputies on Thursday night, I think it is, for a couple of hours. So the short answer is they will be included, but we're at a very, very early stage in this whole thing. Yeah. The last thing we would have wanted to do was throw the whole capital plan at them 2 or 3 weeks ago until we'd actually been able to have the team do some quite considered work around it. And the other question was around the consultation. So I don't know who can answer that from Pete. Yep. Peter, sorry.
To really answer that question, we need to be further down the track of understanding what it is we're actually proposing. This is such an early stage where you can't really run a legal ruler over a decision, because there isn't one yet, to say this is a special consultative procedure or not. So look, to just reframe that, we're at an early stage where we're trying to understand the issues and all get on the same page about what the issues are. This is a first stab at what a response might be, with more response yet to come, which is probably the earliest stage you'd want to take it to the boards, because you want to go with something. You want to say this is what the issues are and this is what the beginning of the response might look like. So that's why we've got the briefing on Thursday. But in terms of triggering an SCP, we probably need to be further advanced before we can say what does and doesn't do it, because there is no decision yet. As I said at the start of this meeting, it's not a decision-making meeting. It's an explore the options meeting. So when we are more definite, then we can get a more definite view.
No, that's
But
Sorry,
Peter, is it not fair to say we have worked very hard to try and ensure that we don't find ourselves in that position?
That is true.
Best we can. Otherwise, it's very open-ended, and I would be in Councillor Johansson's shoes then going, well, we wouldn't know that until February.
Well, that's right. And all the way through, staff have had a view, including a legal view of what might trigger an amended LTP.
Could we get that circular? I think that'd be quite helpful, just to give us a sense of understanding. And the other question, which I have put on a wee while ago, the 25th of January for the revaluation. I appreciate that's when people's specific properties will come out. In terms of the kind of trend, though, is there any information that can be shared with the public over what the trends are showing now, given the seriousness of that impact.
I don't know if we have Andrew here, or Leah might be able to.
I think Leah's coming in.
They'll teach me for not listening. So, what was the question again? Sorry, about QVs.
The rateable valuations.
Yep.
I appreciate that the public, in terms of their individual properties, will get advised on the 25th of January.
Yep.
But just in terms of the other information around what the trends are showing, the kind of bigger picture stuff about what that means in terms of the city and who pays what, is there any opportunity for that to be, part of the engagement, part of public communications ahead of the individual release?
No, because the point is it's a process that the QV are undertaking, and it is an audited process, and so until those numbers are confirmed, we have no ability to release any data on that.
So what you're saying is it's not our data until
not our
the
data.
auditors have
We
cleared
cannot
it.
release it.
Great, Aaron.
Yeah, so it's kind of almost looking a little at that first question that's up there around the global and local situation on annual plan development. Is it today on the right track? And given that it's sitting around 9% increase to rates isn't a bill that people have a choice on. It's not like you can cut back your white bread consumption or use less petrol even and stuff. It's one that's locked in. So it is a big jump for many households. So I think there'll be a lot of people in the community going, how much have they really tried to cut back, and would we even go as far as having, that's what our one looks like of 8.9, but if people wanted to go really hard, then we need to hear submissions on these certain items. So when we go out to the public, they really tell us where they don't want the council spending money for the next year or two.
There are some slides to come about further levers, including levels of service, grants, revenue, and other options that go beyond where we are now.
Does anyone else have? Oh, do you have something, Aaron?
No, I was just going to say thank you.
Oh, okay, cool. Very good. You can do that.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any high-level type questions? Melanie, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Mine's on the rating for renewals. Is that high level enough? Yep. So that's proposed to start rating for that again in 2026 financial year, isn't it?
Through you.
Well,
Chair.
to keep the increase going, I mean.
That's correct. So we're reducing it from it. There was a bit of a peak in the next year, so reducing that peak. But of course, to still meet our 2031 target, it does put more into the following years. Yep.
So with the graph that we've seen about how it looks for 2026, which is sort of outside the scope of this council, is it a concern, I guess, to officers that in that year when we may have other financial burdens, that this might be something that is an appetite to keep cutting back, well, not increasing as we should be doing? Because really we want to get to 100% at some point, don't we?
Absolutely, that's the goal, and one that we're committed to. And it's a good point. How far can you push it off, and because you want to maintain that target that we're aiming for. A big complication in this space is the whole Three Waters reform and the level of assets and renewal expenditure that is involved in that comes out. And so then we do that, then where are we sitting, and what would be a realistic target for that? So that would be an LTP discussion. And so then we'd be looking at we're looking at making sure that was still fitting with where we wanted to go. And we'll probably re-look at that. Where are we wanting to? What is a realistic target? Yeah.
Is this something that we could ask ratepayers about when we do the consultation for this specifically? Because if you're looking at rates and people that own houses generally own them for a long time, and taking a long-term view on this, like 10, 20 years, it may be something we don't wish to come back on now, possibly.
Certainly we could ask. The difficulty, I guess, we're asking them for the impact for next year, and what the consequences by doing that has on future years. So we're asking them, let's just be clear, in my head, we're asking them whether or not they want us to reduce.
Can I just jump in there too, Russell, though? I just think you need to... This is one of those things that and we've done it before, with the earthquakes and stuff, and it is one of those levers that we can pull. We need to remember we're in a perfect storm at the moment. There's a lot of things going on this financial year that we need to look at and look at the levers we can. We are going into an LTP next year, which will allow us to consider all of those impacts, also the impact of the economic environment at that stage. So it gives us more of an ability under the LTP to actually work through that and consult on that strategy as we're going through. So we're recommending as officers that this is actually one of those times where we should be pulling this lever and actually smoothing through, because as Russell said, it was a peak based on the LTP. We are still working on the basis that we will still get to what our renewal of 2031. However, we do believe it is one of those levers we should be pulling at this stage.
With that, the 2031 target is 80% rather than 100, isn't it?
Yeah, correct.
So what's the, when are we aiming to get to 100?
I can't remember what the modelling is. It's about 2% of year. Yeah, I'm looking at. I can come back to you on that. I won't guess right now.
Great. Pauline?
Just on that, is it fair to say that our Three Waters renewals percentage of the budget would be around 25%? The ballpark figure? Oh, anyway, maybe we can come back on that, but it's a reasonable chunk of it, anyway, I think fair to say.
Look, I haven't got the numbers on top, but I would expect that'd be more than 25%, but I'll come back and confirm.
Yeah, it could be around 30. So when will we know? Will we know about the Three Waters by the end of this calendar year? Is that the idea when it goes through for the final reading?
Know what?
That it's
number?
going through? That it's approved?
Yeah, so the first legislation that is supposed to be through shortly before Christmas. So we will know. Well, we're working on the basis that it is going through, and that's why the basis of the LTP next year will be that it is removed. But some of the other things that we are working through, which impact our financials, is it won't be until March next year that we know what the debt number that will be that we will recover as part of that, because we are in the process of, early next year we'll be working with NTU so that we can confirm that number. So until we have all those things, we won't actually know where the position is.
Yeah, and so if that's signed off as happening thing, we receive the debt repayment of 1.something billion. We also save on the depreciation of the assets, but we also lose the rating that. So
Correct.
We need to know that for the LTP.
Correct, exactly.
But I'm just thinking that if we were to know by February, that would lead into the discussion that we're having, that Mel's pointing out, whether we continue to reduce that
We won't have that number.
depreciation in the meantime.
We will not have that number by time for the draft annual plan.
However, we should have that number by the time you actually
Sign off.
approve the annual plan.
Right.
And that, we will be in consultation. It's a movable feast.
Yeah.
Pauline, you're absolutely right to
Yeah.
ask this question. And we'll certainly have more information available by the time we get to June.
Right.
So we can be working through the consequences to be able to inform you,
Yeah.
including also the views of the public.
So that could be very helpful. Thanks.
But also just noting too, not to complicate it, but it's like going through all the assets too and determining what stays and what goes. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. So I just don't want to say by definite by 30th of June we'll know all those answers.
Yeah, okay.
Might know some.
Yeah.
And we may be able to take in fact, I would advise that we would take a risk-based approach and look at it from that perspective.
It may be a unique circumstance for a year or two, which I think you and I could do some, and Mel could do some work on. Okay, very good. Andre.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess just something I'd wondered for some time as a community board member looking into council and just watching these consultations take place. It's so each year council will consult on a certain rate rise. So in this case, if hypothetically it goes out and say to residents in the consultation, do you support an 8.9% increase? Of course, the answer is generally going to be nah. But what opportunity is there to have different options as part of a consultation? So it might say 8.9% increase, or it might say, for example, the rate of inflation 7.2, but it would involve cuts to X, Y, Z. Like what potential is there to provide actual options as we put these consultations out? Because usually it's just the one figure, but the public's never got any clear idea on how to get to other figures, and I've just found that always quite confusing looking in.
We have consulted with LTPs with options in them. Annual plans are really meant to be more of a top-up of what's changed in your long-term plan.
Yeah.
And while it's very early days, we're still canvassing the idea of options for the LTP as a possible way to go.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, annual plans are really, this is what's moved and this is our response to it. It would introduce a fair note of complexity to try to go out with an annual plan at this stage that has numerous options.
Yeah.
So I think it would be, putting legalities aside, it would be complex and logistically complex to do that now.
I understood. I guess what I'm asking is there any opportunity for very simple options, very, very limited simple options, but with some guidance to make clear to residents on how we get somewhere in rates
Probably
increases.
not something I can answer off the
Yeah,
hip,
sure.
but
Yeah.
I think even though we're only in flight and 8.9 is the final number, even that's not simple as a single option.
Yeah.
But look, I can certainly talk to colleagues and try to come back to you with an answer. But initial off the hip is keeping it simple may not be as simple as it sounds.
Understood. Yeah.
There is a component in this of approximately, as you saw in the table, 8% that's coming at us from the outside world: interest, inflation, insurance, which are inflexible external costs. So we're trying to deal with this in a way that confronts those things and arrives at a tenable position where we have never had that proportion of inflexible external costs before. Normally it's what levers do we pull. In this case, it's what levers can we pull around these things because they don't move. We don't control interest rates. We don't control inflation. When you get revalued, the insurance automatically becomes X. So we're trying to maneuver around an inflexible object, and that's what makes it complex. Is that a fair?
It is, and just to add to that, and for members' benefit, but also for any public who may be watching, the current figure sits at 8.9. We have not completed our work.
Yes.
And until we've completed our work, so I wouldn't want us to think that that is where we're going to necessarily end up, because I think we may be able to go a little further. The second, in terms of the options, is the challenge around making sure we don't find ourselves moving into an LTP, because that is physically impossible to do at this point, to be able to get to a consultation document in February. And in reality, we will be getting as close to it. This is about managing your budget in year and being able to deal with the financial pressures that Peter has quite rightly described. There are external costs that we have no control over whatsoever. So it's me and my officer's job to get that as close to our original figure that we possibly can, recognising the challenges that we're facing. And we are pulling as many rabbits out of the hat as we can.
So we go Tyrone and Aaron, and then I'm quite keen to so you go first, then Aaron, and then we'll move on to the other stuff.
Thanks, Sam. New councillor, crazy question time. So if by some miracle, like thought experiment here, like we just eliminate all of our debt, just was paid off by a mysterious benefactor tomorrow, what would that do to our to the rates profile for our annual plan and for future years?
Thanks very much. I'm just going to look behind me.
To the miracle.
I think the word is significant discount, isn't it?
What I'm trying to do is get an understanding of how the relationship between debt pay down and rates reduction.
Sure. And look, I can't quantify that at the moment, but we can send a table. It will show what that'll look like.
Okay.
But it would be significant.
Okay, thank you. Cheers.
Okay, Aaron, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I love the reference to the external fixed costs that we get no say over, because that's how a lot of households see their rates bill. But they do get a say. But what would it look like, Peter, if the guidance given by councillors didn't look anything like this. It looked more like it was under 5%. What would that look like? As a workload, and is it remotely doable if that was an expectation from the public?
There
I'll
are some.
answer that.
Sorry.
Because household incomes will not be going up by 8.9%. And yet we're going to ask them to increase their payments to us by that. So there's a term called cutting your cloth.
And
Well,
that's
the lucky ones will get more than that.
That's exactly what we're trying to do, Aaron, in the sense that our current figure before the external cost came in was sat at 5.05. So that was where you as elected members in terms of the LTP thought we would be.
I think you'll find it was them as elected members.
The collective elected members, the majority voted there. We've got an additional plus 8% over. What we're trying to do is manage that down as close to that 5.05, but to be realistic with that level of immovable costs, to get anything at 5 would be, in my view, impossible. So
Okay,
I'm being
so
honest and upfront about that. Otherwise, we would have been having that conversation in terms of an LTP, I would think,
Well,
Peter, wouldn't we?
can I ask the question in a simpler way? Because the public, it's a very simple term that the public often uses. Why not set a number, and that is your budget, and you cannot go beyond it? Just like my household and my neighbour's household, there is a number that we cannot spend more on this year. Why, as a council, do we not do that? And that is a question that I think thousands of people, especially those that don't love the council, ask themselves. The few hundred that love us come in and tell us, but there's the others that grumble about their rates bill.
Because the reality is, Aaron, is that there's only two ways we've got. We either increase our revenue, and we are restricted on our revenue that we can increase, or reduce our costs, which is what you're saying. But reducing our cost comes at literally a cost in regards to our levels of service. So if the councillors want us to start reducing our levels of service that are in contradiction to our LTP, then that is the conversation we need to have.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, can we just have like a 5-minute break now? And then, not based on that. Not at all. That's so. Can we do that just 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll work through the guidance that we need to give this afternoon. Ready to go? Yes. There's not many here, so we might get it done quickly. We're good to go? Okay, great. So what we're going to do, I just thought it was useful to just have 5 minutes, everyone have a think about things. And then, so what we're going to do is if we can jump through, Peter, do you want to jump to this, the key direction required around OPEX slide?
Yep.
And what I'm keen for us to do is we'll do this, we'll then go back to the CapEx and provide some direction there. And then what I want to do is go around the table, and if people have got projects and things they want raised for the team to look at before we meet again, then they can flag them here. So I know, like Yanni, you've had, which is really good, had questions and things like that about them. We can air whatever people want in the time we've got, and then that will help feedback into what we're doing once the team have gone away and done some work. So, do you want to jump to that slide?
Okay, to quickly recap.
And just the other thing, I'm quite keen. What the team need is some certainty around where they're going to go away now and do the work. So I think what's going to be easier is people can ask, if there are questions about it, we can have a discussion. But at the same time, I just want people to raise their hands when we get to the end, just to get a general flavour of where the guidance is around a lot of the stuff. So,
thank you.
Over to you.
Okay, so to quickly recap, we opened the day with an initial number of 14.6. We took you through steps to get it to 8.9, and these are steps to go further than lower than 8.9. Part of the steps to get here was the reduction of the capital program by 164 odd million. We'll circle back to that to find out whether that's the right number or it needs to go lower. But in terms of OPEX, which is a real determinant of rates, to go lower than where we are today, we'll either need to push harder on the levers we've just talked through, or to go to more challenging levers. So they involve either cutting levels of service, or deferring or cutting grants, or looking at user charges in a material way. All of these would need to be material changes to bring that number down. This is not something where you can save it on coffee makers and pot plants. This is significant services, grants, or charges. So, reducing levels of service. For the new councillors in particular, this is just some process stuff. Levels of service are set in the long-term plan. There were some cuts or deferrals that were raised there and that were not accepted by the council. Some levels of service are mandatory. We don't get to change the measure. We may be able to change the target. As I said, significant savings will only come from significant levels of service. Marginal ones will not make any impact on these kinds of numbers. However, quite literally, significant levels of service are one of the triggers for consultation and possibly a consultative procedure. That's purely in the interests of transparency. That's what the Local Government Act does. It says if you want to affect what mum and dad get for their rates dollar, you have to be transparent. You have to provide an opportunity for affected parties to be heard. You have to tell them what you're proposing to do, how it will impact them, what the reduction is, and so on. And to be fair, there is a history of community concern around those proposals that goes back many years now. I don't think that's news to perhaps the more experienced councillors, any of those facts there. But on that basis, we're not looking for name a level of service now and how much you want to cut, but we are looking for an understanding of whether staff need to go away and investigate this. It is a significant body of work, and some of the pros and cons have been listed there. We're looking for an initial steer on, is this a viable thing to do or not?
So what do people think? I mean, the first question that came into my mind was, is there an ability for heads of service to come back to us with, next year with what a 5 or 10% saving in their OPEX departments would look like? So that doesn't mean triggering levels of service things, but at the same time it just says, are there choices within there we'd be prepared to make? So just be keen on your thoughts.
I hate to say it is case by case, because a 10% cut in library hours is going to be a day a week less.
Yeah. Sorry.
But it depends what the level of
No, I'm
service
not.
is.
Yes, I don't want to jump to library hours. 'Cause that's probably
No.
not helpful in this setting.
No.
But thank you, Peter, for that.
Timely reminder.
What I'm simply saying is that at a high level for heads of service, are there more things they can go away and look at and come back to us as effectively things that wouldn't trigger breaches to levels of service? And maybe it's a Leah question. That actually might be palatable to the council. I'm just conscious of Aaron's point, which is this number is still very, very high, and we need to be not only seeing but acting on some further savings.
Yeah, look, I think you need to be a wee bit careful. The council has gone through significant cost savings in the last couple of years. And if it's quite one thing to give us direction on levels of service that you're prepared for us to go in and consider and the impact on that. But to go back to be blunt, to a council that is absolutely exhausted, that is already working in an environment where our vacancies are high, and actually asking them to look for further cost savings when we're in the middle of where we are before February is really pretty high. I think we'd all rather have some direction from the council if there's specific levels of service that you want us to consider and the impacts on that. Happy to go and do that work.
Okay, so do we have a list of the levels of service that we could go through?
Yeah, we can circulate them.
Yeah, they're in the long-term plan, but they do cover all of our services.
I guess where I'm trying to get to, and I appreciate what you're saying, is if you think about it from a governance point of view, we rely on the heads of service and general managers to provide advice on changes. So quite frankly, I'm not that keen to. Sorry. Well, they haven't. They've said they don't want to touch levels of service or look at savings within it. But if that would always be the case. What I'm wondering is whether there's an ability for, and it's not a decision now. I know everyone's looking shocked down the back, but whether there's an ability to come back with some further choices that could be made in January next year.
Yep, but if what you're saying before in regards to, for instance, your library hours, if the council's not prepared to even consider reducing library hours, why would we actually ask our staff to go and do all that work?
Well, again, I don't
fair?
want to have it is fair, but what I'm still trying to understand is from a governance point of view, we rely on the general managers within the organisation to provide advice. Where's the visibility over that? So what I'm saying is there more that can be looked at that's the whole point of doing this in public. Is there more that can be looked at now? They might not be decisions we take, but surely at a heads of service or general manager point of view, someone can come back with some advice in January or in February that says these things are palatable, these things are not. Unless I'm not making that.
Well, it's really different. One year we did that with reducing mowing of parks and things, and there was an uproar from the people. So it's really hard for staff to know what to bring us and what not.
We'll just backfill the advice because we know what the decision's going to be.
Completely, yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's wasted, but that's.
But we also
part of
did
the
this
process.
with
So
the COVID
I
hit.
think
And there's documents there already with all that
so.
stuff.
Rather than go round in circles, if I can intervene, we already have all of the detail and data from our LTP work. We can revisit that and bring that back to you. I have no problem with that because we've got it already. Knowing what we had, but we have a different set of councillors around the table, so you may have a different debate. The other side of that is, from management team and from my expectation, is it is our job to continue to drive efficiency and effectiveness. And we are doing that on a daily basis. Therefore, we know where we're able to secure potential savings. And we've been doing that for over 2 years now, with significant benefit to the bottom line for council. We're not going to stop doing that, regardless of what the financial challenge is, because that's the job that we should be doing. But we can look at the OPEX stuff. We are going to look at our vacancy issues, which is what we've said in here as well. And we will continue to bring that number down as far as we can. We will bring the OPEX stuff back, and we can do that in the new year.
Great. Melanie first, and then.
I mean, another way of doing that might be putting it in the consultation document and asking the public what they'd like to see cut.
Completely.
And leave it up to them because it's their city.
Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, so where are we landing on this? Do we want... so what is council's direction on level of service decreases?
Is there appetite?
only ask for the information if there's an appetite to make changes. Don't make the staff go through it. That's uncool.
Yeah.
If you get the hands up, if you're unhappy with 8.9, put your hands up and ask staff to do work. If
No,
you don't
Aaron,
like it,
that's
don't.
not fair.
Everyone's-
Nobody wants 8.9.
Let's stop. So let's just.
How are we going to get lower?
Let's just think about what we're here for. So we're looking at whether there's an appetite to look at so just think, we're in the very early stages of this. Is there an appetite from council to look at the levels of service and whether we decrease them? That's the
important question.
I mean, are you talking over the longer term, or like in the next year?
The annual
For the annual plan.
So just for the annual plan, right? So, and not looking at levels of service changes that will have an impact in future years. So like beginning a process.
Yeah, that'll be considered through the long-term plan. That's correct.
Right. So, okay. Yep.
Yep.
I think I'm clear.
Sarah.
Sorry, just clarification. To put it in plain English, lowering levels of service is a staff issue. You can't let them go for a year and get them back. And certainly not in this market. I just wanted to be very upfront in plain English about that.
So this is good. You're actually debating the fundamental issue. Do you wish for us to look at how we could reduce levels of service? Just give us the guidance in relation to that. Doesn't mean we won't carry on doing what we're doing in terms of driving the efficiency pieces through.
I just think it's just too nuanced a question to give you a black and white answer.
Yeah. So that would be a yes. We want to look at options.
My answer is yes, but I think it's not binary. It's not do we go to zero or do we continue with everything as the status quo. I think in this environment there are going to be things that are more pressing than others, and I think that given the challenges that we face, it's kind of information that we have to consider, and we will weigh that up hand in glove with the community. So my answer to that is yes, I would. Though I don't have an expectation to do wholesale levels of service cuts, but I think that it has to be considered.
Can I just... So I'm reluctant to look at levels of service. We've had really clear staff advice that any choices that we make in levels of service that would actually make a difference to rates would be substantial enough that it would require a long-term plan, and that a long-term plan, special consultative process, is not possible at this stage. So if we want to make a difference to rates through levels of service, we would be putting our staff through a huge amount of work over the Christmas break for something that is actually not possible for us legally to do within the time frame. And I think we've had really clear advice from staff on that. I would like us to look at other ways of being more efficient and raising money, all of those kind of things to try and lower rates as much as we can. But I think that this particular lever we've had really clear advice on, that it's something that would put staff out of work at a time where we're struggling to A, retain them, and B, attract and recruit new staff at a time where people are already complaining that we're not meeting our current levels of service. And so to reduce those even further, I think would not be a good idea.
Okay, so just...
It depends
so
what it is.
Okay.
If I can just add to that, we did go through very with great scrutiny for last year's annual plan and also the LTP, where we pared away and reduced it right down as well. So we have looked at it, I think, as far as we can. But I like Melanie's idea to simply put a question out there in the document. You don't know what people will come up with and what their tolerance will be, and then it would be coming from the community, not us. And as I said, the kickback we got from reducing the mowing of the parks and reserves and things was huge. People had no appetite for that. And so you've got to, it's all very well to ask staff to go through it again. It is a huge amount of work. And then you've got to find a particular level of service that would give us a decent chunk of savings, and I doubt whether we would find it.
So we'll go James, and then I think we'll just get some guidance and move on. And so James.
Yeah, well, look, I don't disagree with anything that's been said. However, a lot of this work has already been done, which we've heard, so I don't think that we're not going to ask for the wheel to be completely reinvented. I just think that the thing that's changed is the context and the climate that we're in. So I think if there's an ability to bring back the stuff that already has been done for us to consider it, with a new lens, and that's going to be helpful. But I think the reality is there's not going to be one lever that we can pull to change the situation to make it more palatable for residents. I think the reality will be it'll have to be a combination of levers, 100 potentially that we're going to have to pull ever so slightly to get it to a place that's going to be palatable. So I think we're kidding ourselves if we think levels of service are not going to be one of those levers. And I think if a lot of the work's already been done, then why don't we just reconsider it, through the light.
Okay, so I think Andre, and then I think we've had enough of a balanced conversation to then just give some guidance on it, because we've got limited time and more stuff. So Andre, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Just picking up on the comments that we've looked at this and looked at options, but it's also as a new council, and there is a number of new members here that haven't, been able to look and consider these options as well. And being a new council, I don't actually feel like we've got much choice on this. I don't think, the public would consider it appropriate for us to not be getting options on levels of service given the current state of play right now. So I honestly don't feel like we've got much choice and that we have to do this. Not that we want to, but kind of have to. Thank you.
All right, so some guidance from us on whether we want to look at decreasing these. That doesn't mean we will, but it means we'll look at them for next year. So can we just have a raise of hands? I think it's just going to be easier than...
Sorry, what's the question?
So the question is, do we want to look at levels of service being decreased for consideration next year? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Tim, are you yay or nay on that, man?
I'm nay on that.
Okay, so that's effectively 8-8. So we won't be looking at the levels of service.
We won't be re-looking.
Yeah. So if we can move on to the next one. It's a great way to start, isn't it?
There's approximately $18 million worth of community grants issued by council, and that's across a wide range, very diverse range of activities around the city. The grants are operational, so they have a direct impact on rates. They have been reviewed several times in my time with Christchurch. Again, like levels of service, if you choose to defer or reduce, it may trigger a consultation process. Some groups have pre-committed their grants, so there's a pre-existing arrangement issue for potentially some grants. And presently, community grants are increased at 2% per annum overall, so as a macro. And again, there is, when these are raised, there is a history of community concern. Doesn't mean it can't be done. I'm just simply laying out the facts of history there. So again, we're looking for a steer about whether this is somewhere we need to explore or not.
I think there are two questions in here. One is the quantum of the size of grants, which we know is 18 million. That's one thing. And the other, separate, is whether you wish to consider putting the inflation figure that is currently in there on or not. So there's two different things.
Oh, you just got it in there.
Right. Melanie?
Well, no surprises.
You want to cut it?
And I wouldn't like to cut this. I mean, 2%, if you look at the current inflation that we're in, actually means a decrease in money in real terms to these groups. And we know that for every dollar you give us $5, $6, $7 worth of value. They do a lot of work that would cost council a heck of a lot more if it were to do the same work. So I would be crazy to cut this funding.
Yeah, thanks. I just wasn't sure what, like, in terms of Christchurch and Z, right? We're giving them a heap amount of money. Like, is anything being considered there? I know we're doing the letter of expectation tomorrow, and it's not very specific around that. But obviously, what I'm trying to understand is what is the discretion around the amount that we give them in terms of that could be considered?
So is that a question that can be answered today, or do you need to come back?
Yeah, no, so the CNZ funding is as agreed in the LTP. So we are not recommending a change to that, which is why it is not in the letter of expectations.
Sorry, I'll put that around a different way. What's the committed quantum that we have to fund CNZ versus what's the discretionary annual amount that we have if we have any say over? Is there anything that we have, like through the endowment fund or through any of the other big projects that they do? Is there any discretionary funding that we're giving them?
No, there's no discretionary funding. It's committed funding through the LTP.
So it's all contractually committed?
Yep. Well, it's contracted as part of the LTP,
Okay,
correct?
So, I mean, but we've got lots of projects in here that are kind of committed as part of the LTP that we can still change for capital. Yeah.
So I think the question is, and it's not one that needs to be answered now, is there any ability to look at the Christchurch NZ grant? The answer may be no, but it would be useful to just come back with that answer in due course. So if we go back to the community grants side of it, Aaron, you've got to...
It was just on the Christchurch NZ one. Is that, like this one here's got the inflation amount, as Melanie put, a low one at 2%, so it's palatable. But the does Christchurch NZ have a percentage increase in theirs?
We'll come back to you.
And if
Aaron,
so,
on that.
can that be kept?
All right, we'll come back. Yeah, Pauline.
Clarify where Yanni was coming from. Were you suggesting that possibly some of CNZ's funding be from the Capital Endowment Fund?
Well, no. They historically they've put in applications to use the endowment fund to do like one-off projects, tourism campaigns in Australia, whatever it may be. And so there's always been a sort of a quantum of money that they get additional to the operational grant that they use on special sort of things, incentives, bids, whatever. So I was just really interested to understand if there was any flexibility around that.
Well, I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah.
We'll get the advice
Yeah,
and get it
thank you.
circulated.
Yeah.
No, good as gold. Okay,
There is no inflation, by the way.
say that again.
There is no inflation on the CNZ.
If we can just get the
Because the other thing is, I also understood that they'd carried forward a lot of funding because of the COVID impacts on a number of events.
No, good point. Well, Leah's going to come back to us with the advice. So in terms of the community grants, is there an appetite to look at changing them?
Tim's got
Sorry, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. With regards to the main players like CNZ, etc., I don't think the question is what the grants are. I think we're in a new situation. Life has changed. We should be asking what the returns are, and if some require a lot of money put in to get money back, that's what we should be looking at. Because positive economic benefit is money coming into the city, not rotating around. So I think we're asking the wrong question from the wrong angle.
So what we're going to do is Leah's going to come back to us with some advice around if there is any portion of the CNZ money that is effectively up for debate, or if not. So we'll just leave that one here. Yeah, and VO. So in terms of
could we also, sorry Sam, it's not just CNZ. If we're going to ask these questions, I think we've got to look at all the players.
So we've got, you might not be able to see the PowerPoint. We've got Christchurch NZ and VO on there. But what we're talking about more, and they'll... No, you're on mute there. I could lip read though. You see Christchurch.
Others like Christchurch Foundation, etc.
Yeah, we're looking the round at the spread.
Yeah, I think Christchurch Foundation's actually wound up now. Not the foundation. Our funding to it is, yeah. Okay, so in terms of the community grants, is there an appetite to look at that for the next... you might have said no, but in a democracy, I need to check with everybody for right. Yeah. Okay, so is there? So
the other thing I don't quite understand, we've got the Better Off conversation tomorrow. We've also had additional government funding put into existing programs of work.
Yep.
When will we get any sense of what impact that will have on the draft budget?
I guess when it's approved. Yeah. So just again, going back to the very beginning of this briefing, this is the first public session.
I get that.
At a high level. No one's making any decisions. We're just providing a wee bit of guidance to the organisation to see where they can go away and do some work. So,
yes, but are they going to have an impact, like on some of the grants, for example?
Yanni, stop. I've just said, we've literally, once the money is approved, then we can consider how we look at it.
I mean, the stuff tomorrow is approved.
Yes. Not tomorrow, but...
Sure, can I help?
It would be useful.
Yes. So in the development of the Better Off funding, we have considered aspects in terms of where there is opportunity to not impact on our annual plan and in therefore increasing rates cost, and utilising where it is legitimate the Better Off funding money. Hence the package we've put together meets the criteria for government, meets the aspect of being financially prudent for council, and meets the impact in terms of improving outcomes. So we have considered those elements, and that's what will be coming forward to council tomorrow as part of the report. And I'm sure Mary will touch on that when she briefs as part of the council meeting.
Okay, so Andre.
Thank you. Yeah, so on this one, I'm here as a new member, very, very familiar with strengthening communities and knowing what value it offers, and I wouldn't, ever lean towards wanting to cut that, but I'm not familiar with the other 2/3. So I'm here thinking it would be, very useful to be able to understand what they are before having an indication whether they should be looked at or not. Any advice appreciated.
Mary, is that something? Yeah. Just flick your mic on.
Oh, sorry. Yes, we can certainly distribute the full breakdown of the grants and how they're divided and where they go. The largest chunk of it is that strengthening communities funding. We'll distribute the full list.
Yeah.
And am I right in believing strengthening communities would be around a third of that?
A third of what?
Of the 18 million.
18 million.
Oh, the 18 million is I think
It's an addition, isn't it?
Yes, it's the strengthening communities, to my memory, is about 12 million.
Okay, so the 18 million doesn't include strengthening communities.
Oh, the first bullet point, no, the first bullet point, 18 million, is to Christchurch NZ and venues Otitahi.
It says excluding Christchurch. So I'm a little bit lost on this as to what.
Oh, sorry. Great. Okay, sorry, I wasn't reading that properly. Yes, so at least to my memory, at least 3/4 of it will be strengthening communities.
I can answer that. So the strengthening community is about 7 million of the 18.
Thank you.
So I guess the thing is there an appetite to look at changing these grants? Melanie said no. Pauline said no. So just if we raise our hands, if we want to look at this for the next meeting, that would be quite useful. Yeah. Nothing's off the table, but so the question is, do we want to look at community grants for the next one? And it looks like we have a majority for that, so we will do that. Okay, if everyone raises their hands again, we'll just
Yes.
So we're good.
Yummy.
Great. Okay, next one, please.
Okay, this is the last of the OPEX levers we're looking at. Again, trying to bring the number down. Materially increasing user charges. We're looking for a steer on what we should explore here. There are some constraints. If we increase our charges above what the market charges, we become uncompetitive. We don't want to drive customers away. They're all there. I'm not going to do them line by line.
No.
But
so the question with this one is, again, do we want some work done to look at it for when we actually come back through in January, February? I'm sure I would have thought everyone will agree. It's not agreeing to anything. It's saying, is there work that can be done and a couple of tweaks made if needed? Everyone generally comfortable with that? Oh, that was way better. Okay.
Not generally comfortable because
except the mayor. We'll just note the mayor's
not generally comfortable.
Okay. Okay, so can we go back to perfect last slide here, and then we've got. So if we could do this ideally in the 5 minutes, then it'll give councillors the opportunity for 10 to flag projects they want looked at before we come back again. So I think we probably need to go to question 3, which is around the proposed capital program of 433, and it's just getting that steer from people if they're comfortable at 433, or whether actually we need to look at lowering that down. That doesn't need to be 390, but it could be in line with what we've been delivering in the past at 400. So can I just get a flavour? I think we've probably canvassed it before. Are people generally comfortable with 433, or they'd like to see it lowered? So if you're comfortable with 433, do you want to just raise your hand?
Yeah.
So is that?
9.
So we've got 9. Okay, so
But CapEx creates OPEX though too. But would this just be an option to have it sit alongside it, of what this may look like?
So 9 people have said 433.
Yeah, 9 people have said they don't. Yeah, they wanted it
All right.
At the 433. Okay, so that's another one done. Right. Any other guidance you need today, Peter?
Unless you wanted to talk about specific projects in the 10 minutes we have left.
Okay, so I think Yanni had some for a start. So what I don't want to do is get into really specific stuff on projects. What I want them flagged with the potential work you want done that will come back. So I don't want like a 5-minute conversation on each one.
Sure.
So we won't comment, we'll just note.
Yeah.
But I would make a plea to members. What date is it today? 6th of December. You'll all go on holiday, and I do want staff to have a little bit of break over Christmas, please. They do need to refresh as well. So please put up the stuff that you really want us to look at, not a long wish list that maybe you want us to look at.
Yeah,
So
cool.
Yanni and then Aaron and then Celeste.
Can I just get an understanding of the CRAF projects, the rephasing, pushing out by 2 years, what that does for the delivery dates? And are those delivery dates different to the ones we got presented with last week now, based on what's in the proposal?
I think that'd be for Lynette.
Do you want to just repeat that question, Yanni?
Sorry, I heard the question. I wasn't going to comment. I was going to bring the answers back.
I'm happy.
Oh,
to-
okay.
bring
No,
that-
let's do
that's
that.
fair
Yep,
point.
good point.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Yanni.
Glad you said that.
That's fine.
Next one.
So there's a number of anchor projects which have been delayed where work is being brought forward in last year's annual plan or the LTP. It would be good to get a sense of what the proposals were to defer those works and what the trade-offs would be in terms of deliverability of things that we want. So, for example, I've been asked to give a whole bunch of substitutions for the ones that I've raised concern with not being done, being delayed, like the CRAF. So it would be really good to understand what the resourcing capacity is and how that's impacted from the central city versus some of the suburban projects like the CRAF.
Okay.
Yeah. And just the only other one was like I've flagged real concern about the organics plant deferral. And yeah, so I just wanted to put that on the table.
So for clarity, because I don't want the public thinking something that isn't, council has yet to make its decision on the organics processing plant. It won't be doing that till at least February. Whatever decision it then chooses to make then will require work to be done. So it's not a deferral in the sense of because we can't, it's just a matter of timing of when the spend is likely to happen, dependent upon the decision.
But we're at a disadvantage in that we haven't seen what the options are that people have put in. The staff obviously have, and we've got a budget bid to change the timing of the funding.
So so I think Dawn made it really, really clear that any changes in the budgeting program for the OPP are not going to slow down the OPP process. That's as simple as that. If we need to bring something forward, we will. Okay, Celeste, and then Aaron, and then James, and then Tim, and then Mark, and then Melanie. And we've got 11 minutes.
Can we get some guidance on the Waitaki Street Estuary Edge work and look at putting that back into the capital program? Both of those programs are deliverable, and Three Waters don't support deferring either of those projects. So I'm concerned that we're looking at deferring 2 Three Waters projects, especially at a time that we're trying to demonstrate good governance around the stewardship of those assets. So just looking for a report back on that one.
So will you flag substitutes as well?
I have, yeah.
You have? Perfect. Great. Excellent.
And the second quick one, which I'll keep brief, is going back to the Pages Road Bridge. Can we just get some clarity on the ancillary projects, how they're aligned and what their interdependencies are? And get some advice on whether we can stage the project so we can deliver those areas that can be progressed. Because I'm aware that the delivery is currently projected to be 2028, which is obviously a significant delay from when it first came on budget, and obviously about 6 years
So we can
past
get some,
the earthquakes. Thank you.
We'll get some advice on that. Aaron, and then James.
Yeah, thank you, Celeste, for raising that bridge. The part of our budget that is internal renovations like carpet, paint, all that stuff, is that CapEx or OpEx?
It's probably a Leah question, but it'll depend on what it is. Yeah. Some of it will be repairs, which is OpEx. Other will be capital, if it's improvements.
So can we give a direction that we will just put like a 1 year or an 18-month halt on any carpet renovations, internal paint, any non-structural maintenance? So mechanical stuff, stuff that can extend the life of the building gets done. Stuff that just makes buildings look good, no.
So what would be useful is if that might be something that Mary and the team pick up and come back on.
Yeah, because it might be a tiny budget, might be a massive
Be a big
budget, but let's just see what it is. Would be handy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. James.
Thanks, I'll be quick. One, just to reiterate, really keen for that prioritisation schedule for works in the capital program. I know a lot of that work's been done before, but even if it could have a bit of refresh, that we could put it in the AP context. The second one is the likes of Old Municipal Chambers, Governor's Bay Jetty, both great examples, I think, with council at its best, partnering with third parties to achieve outcomes. I talked about the Mona Vale Bathhouse, as an example for that, but just wondering if there could be not a whole lot of work invested into it, but just an opportunity for staff to look through some of these projects and just see if there are any projects, in an annual plan context that could conceivably have this model applied to them. Just to give us an idea. It might not fly, but it would just be really good to get some visibility there. Yep. The other one is just not necessarily doing it, but just a bit of an investigation into what would be required to solve the flooding issues with Brenchley Ave. Like, that's just got really dire, and it's one of those things it's like a council 101 thing that we need to get right. So just to get a bit of a flavour of what would be entailed to be able to address that. And then we've got the challenge of where that fits in the timeline.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, but probably we know the costs though with that, don't we? No, that's the thing. Actually, I know you said that slightly facetiously, so I'm not getting at you. But we got an idea with Edgware Village about where that, what the challenges are, what the costs are going to be. I guess what I'm saying is something similar for around that Brenchley area. Just the investigative work, yeah.
Because there'll be OTP.
It's totally to inform our exactly.
Tim.
Thank you. Look, I guess it's a bit of frustration as there are other things we can do which we haven't looked at. I mean, we've got 3 pieces of significant land which we could sell. They could bring in quite significant money with regards to, we could put that towards the Hornby Pool, South Library to Kaha, or Pages Road Bridge to ease the pain for the ratepayer, but also using the Tapai example, if we put high-end commercial property, if it's sold to that end, and certainly 2 of the pieces of land, one of them is in prime area, if you're looking at the value of Tapai and the rates it pays, that kind of money could actually offset the running costs of Te Kaha and ease the burden on the ratepayers. So it wouldn't happen overnight, but we're looking at a hump, if you like, in a few years. But we're looking at everything. I don't think we are. And I think we've got to weigh up. We've got some amazing and really good social housing projects happening, and I think we owe it to our ratepayers to look at everything across the board. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Tim. Mark?
Yeah, I pick up on what Tim's saying there about we need to be looking at all the levers, and I'm staggered to see that we're not prepared to look at 1 or 2 of the levers. And I want the people at home, the ratepayers, are hurting, and if we don't look at all the levers, I don't think we're doing them justice. But going to the projects here, Horsell Junction Road Extension I see is on the list here, and I'm looking at that and thinking, well, our community out there has been waiting for that for far too many years now, as is envisaged by the very low number it's got for project ID. And I just wanted to make sure that we're not pushing back projects unnecessarily that can be delivered.
So I think, an example like that, like the others have raised, flag it with the team. They'll look at it, but the requirement or the onus on us as councillors will be to come up with some substitutes. Because the whole affordability, deliverability of the capital program means that we put something in, we've got to take something out. And that doesn't mean we can't do it. Pages Road might be the bridge might be the same. We can make choices, but we need to be able to make choices. And so flag that with the team, and then if we come up with some substitutes. Okay, Melanie.
I just wanted to get some assurance that projects in the current financial year that are not started are definitely going to roll over to the following, because I've been told that about one particular project, but I haven't heard it from end of the table, I guess.
Do you want me to answer that? One of those schedules, I forget which one it is, attachment 4, shows those projects as zeros, and we briefed on that as to say, if they are zero, we'll keep a close eye on
Not
them.
all projects are in that list.
They were summarised up in the presentation.
Yeah, not all of them are there.
Okay. We can look at that if they're not all there, but if you've got
Yeah,
one...
but as a
you tell me
general
which one
rule
it is.
of thumb, though, that is the case, though, isn't it?
So what you're saying, Melanie, if I'm
There's a
correct-
specific project I've asked about quite a number of times, and I've now had feedback from staff that it will be definitely carried over, but it hasn't come up in any of the documentation, like it had disappeared. So I wanted to seek assurance.
that it hasn't disappeared.
Exactly.
Yeah. So maybe just send through the.
Just tell me which one it is, and we'll look into it.
Can I
This-
take
but-
it
but I-
offline
So
and
if I
have that
can,
conversation?
if I can assist,
Is it
so
Colin Street?
so projects in the current year, if we're not going to deliver them, we will be looking to carry them forward, and that's a decision that the council will make at the end of this financial year, or the beginning of next financial year. So it probably would be helpful if we just captured those projects that are in the current year budget that may not start. We can actually reflect those back to you, just to give you that assurance.
Aaron, and then I think we're.
Yeah, so just the list of current year's projects that contracts haven't been let yet, we were going to see a list of those to see if and what could be halted, and then a follow-up to that last answer.
Do you want to add anything to that, Andrew?
So the list is in the attachments, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, we have a list of those that have got zero expenditure, or the ones that are not committed. Is that right?
So, Dawn, when would the discussion date be for those? Because that wouldn't be part of the annual plan. We need to do that, obviously, as soon as possible to go, what's the appetite?
So the intent here is to flush out those ones in 23 that don't have a commitment. We looked at the concept and the plan phase to see if we could kind of arrest any of them. Quite a few of them were at program level, so they didn't have a contract assigned to them directly because they get funded from the program to a project.
Right.
So there's a kind of a deeper layer to them. They're kind of holding accounts to be allocated to projects, but if they're not going to get spent, then we'll have to carry them forward or consider if they're needed at all. And that was the consideration in that attachment.
So what I suggest we do as part of the capital programme report to F&P, we put a section in relation to that for clarity, and then you can debate that.
Oh, that'd be great. And then the other one was, if there's rollovers from this year projects not being delivered and they're going into the following year, does that come out of the 433 or does it get added onto?
Out of the 433.
So if projects can come out of the 433, why do we not have an appetite to take some more out?
I think the council have already made that decision in terms of giving guidance today by majority, by 9 to 8.
Right.
Okay, all right. Well, I think that's probably concluded the first annual plan briefing in public, and it didn't go as badly as I thought, so that's always a positive. It went
well.
Yeah. I did have no expectation, I should say, but yeah.
Best yet. Thank you, councillor.
So no, that's fantastic. So look, we'll just keep communicating as we work through this over the next wee while, and then any of that work that's been asked for will be fed through to the next lot of briefings, and we'll just continue. I know Lynn and the team will continue to look at how they communicate with the public, because I completely appreciate it's actually quite an anxious time seeing a number like that put out into the public domain, and a 9% on a fixed income, or on in the current crisis of cost of living has a massive problem. So I do think people are worried about it, but we'll just continue to communicate until we make that decision in coming months. So thank you to the team for all the work that's been done so far, and for all the work you're going to do now to get it to a number that we can go out and have a conversation with the public over. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you.